The atmosphere inside the Capitol hearing room was electric. Every seat was taken, every camera light blinking red, ready to capture what was about to unfold. The subject of the session was judicial ethics, a matter that had quietly simmered in Washington for months, but today it burned with unmistakable heat. Justice Samuel Alito sat at the witness table, his black robe folded neatly, his expression carved from years of confidence. Before him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, poised calm, her stack of files organized with surgical precision. She wasn't there to argue, she was there to expose. The first question came like a steady breeze before a storm. "Justice Alito," she began, "when a justice swears an oath to uphold the Constitution, is that oath conditional or absolute?" Alito leaned forward slightly, his tone measured. "Congresswoman, that oath is absolute. But as with any legal principle, its application requires interpretation." "Interpretation," Crockett repeated, eyes narrowing. "Does interpretation ever become justification?" He hesitated. "No, it's a judicial responsibility." She cut in before he could finish. "Then why do rulings seem to change depending on who benefits from them?" The room grew still. Alito's lips tightened. "I reject the premise of your question. The court applies the law as written." Crockett slid a document across the table. "This is a list of cases in which ethics complaints involving members of the court were dismissed internally, without external review. Would you agree that self-policing leaves room for bias?" "Congresswoman," Alito began, "the judiciary maintains its own oversight mechanisms. Those are confidential to preserve integrity." "Confidential," she echoed quietly. "Meaning the public never sees them. Meaning the people whose rights are affected have no insight into the fairness of the process." He leaned back slightly, his patience thinning. "There must be boundaries between judicial independence and political intrusion." Crockett nodded. "Agreed. But independence is not invisibility. There's a difference between protecting justice and hiding it." The tension was now visible, like heat rising from asphalt. Each question struck precisely, every word chosen to tighten the grip. Alito's response came slower this time. "You seem to assume that judges cannot be trusted to act ethically." Crockett replied, "I assume that power without accountability eventually stops recognizing itself." There was a murmur in the crowd. A few reporters leaned forward, sensing a headline forming in real time. Alito's tone sharpened. "Congresswoman, I have served under both Republican and Democratic administrations. My decisions are grounded in law, not politics. And yet," Crockett said, flipping another page, "your written opinions often align with one political outcome. Coincidence or conviction?" His jaw tightened. "Are you accusing the Supreme Court of partisanship?" "I'm questioning whether justice has been replaced by preference," she said evenly. A pause followed, long enough for the sound of a camera shutter to echo through the room. Crockett continued, her tone low but firm. "In 2014, you wrote that disclosure of gifts to justices could create unnecessary suspicion. Do you still believe transparency causes more harm than secrecy?" Alito adjusted his glasses. "Transparency must be balanced with privacy. Every justice deserves protection from political targeting. Protection," Crockett said, "should be for the innocent, not the insulated." The words landed like thunder. Alito's expression froze, his eyes flicked toward the committee chair, perhaps expecting intervention. But none came. Everyone knew this was history in motion, and no one dared interrupt it. Crockett leaned forward, voice calm but unyielding. "Do you believe the Supreme Court should have a formal ethics code, yes or no?" Alito hesitated. "The court is capable of governing itself." She raised an eyebrow. "Like a police department investigating its own misconduct." A brief rustle moved through the crowd. The justice's composure faltered, just slightly. "Congresswoman," he said tightly, "you are oversimplifying complex judicial principles." "Maybe," she said, "but the American people don't live under complex principles. They live under consequences." The tension in the room could have been carved with a knife. Even the photographers had stopped clicking. Crockett's voice softened, but her precision never wavered. "Justice Alito, when the court shields itself from scrutiny, it asks the nation to trust blindly, but trust is earned, not demanded. So I'll ask you again, who holds the court accountable when it refuses to hold itself accountable?" Alito gave no immediate answer. His eyes dropped to the papers before him, then to the water glass at his side. For a moment it seemed he might speak, but the words never came. The committee chair announced a brief recess. The gavel struck once, but the echo lingered. Alito stayed seated, staring straight ahead while Crockett calmly gathered her papers. She didn't gloat, didn't smile, only adjusted her blazer, as if preparing for the next round. It was clear to everyone in that room. The justice had entered with authority, but he would leave defending it. The balance of control had shifted, and no one could unsee it. What began as a routine oversight hearing had become a confrontation between tradition and truth, for the first time, was winning. The recess ended with a low murmur spreading through the room. The hearing chamber, moments ago buzzing with whispers, quieted again as Justice Samuel Alito returned to his seat. His face was composed, but his eyes betrayed fatigue, not of body, but of certainty. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had already resumed her place. She wasn't smiling, but there was an undeniable confidence in the stillness of her posture. The first half of the exchange had shaken the court of opinion. Now, the second half would test the limits of restraint. As the gavel fell, she began again. Justice Alito, before the break, you declined to support a formal ethics code for the court. May I ask, what do you fear it would expose? Alito's tone turned sharper. Fear, Congresswoman. The court fears nothing. Our independence is a cornerstone of democracy. Independence, Crockett said, isn't the same as immunity. He frowned. And yet, without independence, the judiciary becomes a political puppet. Crockett leaned forward. And without accountability, it becomes a monarchy. The exchange drew collective breath from the audience. Alito's jaw. You are treading dangerously close to questioning the constitutional structure of the court. I'm questioning the moral structure of those who sit on it. She replied calmly. The Constitution was designed to prevent power from becoming permanent. But lately, permanence seems to have replaced principle. Alito straightened, voice rising slightly. Congresswoman Crockett, you imply corruption where there is none. Every justice is bound by honor. She interrupted. Honor without oversight isn't honor. It's habit. And habits are dangerous when no one questions them. Alito exhaled, visibly frustrated. I find it offensive that members of Congress, who themselves are no strangers to scandal, would presume to lecture the judiciary on ethics. Crockett didn't blink. And yet, Congress faces elections. The people can remove us. Can they remove you? The words hit like a gavel strike. The silence that followed was deafening. Alito didn't respond. Not immediately. He sipped water, his hand trembling ever so slightly. Cameras caught every movement. She continued, steady and deliberate. Justice Alito, the Supreme Court wields immense power. Power to define life, liberty, and justice. But what happens when that power begins serving itself instead of the people? He answered curtly. That is a political question, not a legal one. It's both, Crockett countered. Because when decisions are shaped by personal beliefs, the law ceases to be blind. It becomes biased. His voice deepened. You insult the integrity of an institution that has stood for centuries. And you defend a system that refuses to evolve, she said. Institutions don't survive by hiding from change. They survive by facing it. There was a pause, long, uneasy, alive with unspoken words. Crockett turned another page in her binder, her tone now precise as a scalpel. Let's talk about public confidence, she said. Recent polls show the Supreme Court's approval rating has fallen to historic lows. Do you believe that's because the people have suddenly lost respect for law, or because they've lost trust in those interpreting it? Alito frowned. Public opinion should not dictate judicial legitimacy. True, she said. But public trust sustains it. The justice shifted in his seat. Congresswoman, the court cannot bow to populism. Justice must remain insulated from temporary passions. Temporary passions, she repeated softly. When women's rights, voting rights, and civil liberties are at stake, those passions are not temporary. They're constitutional cries for equality. A soft gasp rippled through the gallery. Even the committee chair appeared uncertain whether to intervene. Crockett's words carried the weight of public outrage, distilled into law and conscience. Alito adjusted his microphone. This line of questioning has become theatrical. Crockett leaned back slightly, voice steady as a heartbeat. It's only theatrical when truth makes people uncomfortable. Her restraint was remarkable. Each sentence landed with surgical calm, but beneath it was the rhythm of justice, relentless, logical, precise. She opened a folder marked, Disclosures. Justice Alito, records show you attended multiple privately funded events sponsored by political donors. Did you report all of those trips as required under the Ethics in Government Act? He blinked once, caught off guard. I followed all reporting requirements applicable to my office. Applicable, she asked. Meaning the ones you chose. Alito's irritation broke through his composure. Congresswoman, this is an attempt to tarnish my reputation for political gain. Crockett's eyes narrowed slightly. No, Justice. This is an attempt to remind America that even power has paperwork. A faint murmur of laughter echoed from the back rows, quickly hushed, but noticed. Her tone turned colder. When a justice accepts gifts or trips from individuals with business before the court, what message does that send to the public? He bristled. Those instances are exaggerated. Attendance at events does not equate to influence. Crockett replied softly, then why hide them? He didn't answer. The silence stretched on until Crockett broke it herself. You see, Justice, people don't lose faith in the law because it's complicated. They lose faith because it looks compromised. That sentence landed hard. Alito stared at her, not as a justice, but as a man cornered by precision. You've made your point, Congresswoman, he said finally, his tone clipped. Not yet, Crockett replied. The point is that truth doesn't need protection, power does. And right now, the court seems far more interested in protecting itself than the Constitution it swore to serve. The words hung in the air like a verdict. The chair finally intervened, announcing another short recess. But this time the crowd didn't immediately disperse. Everyone sensed something bigger brewing, an undercurrent of conflict that couldn't be paused with a gavel. Alito rose abruptly, avoiding Crockett's gaze as he spoke briefly to his aide. His shoulders were tense, movements rigid. Crockett, by contrast, stood calmly, collected her notes, and stepped aside to speak quietly with a staffer. She had drawn no sword, raised no voice, yet the chamber felt like a battlefield. The justice walked out briefly through the side door, muttering something under his breath. Cameras followed his exit. Whispers spread instantly through the room had the justice just walked out mid-hearing, and with that, the tension transformed from debate to breaking news. The power dynamic had shifted completely, not through anger or accusation but through precision. Crockett had not shouted him down, she had simply left him nowhere to stand. The air inside the hearing room had changed. When Justice Samuel Alito re-entered after his brief exit, the atmosphere was no longer professional. It was volatile. The committee members shifted in their seats, the press leaned forward, and the silence grew so dense it felt alive. Crockett sat poised again, her notes open to a fresh page. There was no visible aggression on her face, just focus. Calm, unflinching focus. Alito adjusted his microphone. His tone was clipped, defensive. Congresswoman Crockett, I trust we can now proceed with decorum. She nodded once. Of course, Justice Alito. Let's continue with facts, not feelings. A few reporters exchanged glances. That line, soft as it sounded, struck directly at the heart of his rising irritation. Crockett lifted a document. This is a record of your attendance at the 2021 Liberty Forum, hosted by organizations that have filed multiple amicus briefs before your court. Can you confirm whether you disclosed this trip? He hesitated. I do not recall the specifics of that event. Would you like me to remind you? She asked, her tone steady. His eyes narrowed. Congresswoman, this tone is inappropriate. The public believes secrecy is inappropriate, she said evenly. I'm merely giving them clarity. The room rustled. Someone whispered from the back. She's not letting up. Crockett continued. You claim the judiciary polices itself, but records show that ethical inquiries are internally dismissed without transparency. So, again, who holds the Supreme Court accountable when it fails its own test of integrity? Alito exhaled sharply, his patience fracturing. Congresswoman, the judiciary does not answer to legislative intimidation. Intimidation. Crockett's voice sharpened slightly. Questioning isn't intimidation, Justice. It's oversight. Oversight is the foundation of checks and balances, remember. Her tone was factual, not emotional. But it was precisely that composure that made every word land heavier than a shout. Alito leaned forward. You seem more interested in spectacle than substance. This hearing has devolved into political theater. Crockett's reply came fast, controlled. Then let's get to substance. Did you or did you not receive any hospitality or travel benefits from donors or advocacy groups connected to cases pending before your court? He paused, visibly irritated. These insinuations are baseless. You cannot question judicial independence like a prosecutor cross-examining a defendant. Crockett looked directly at him. I'm questioning actions, not independence. And if you feel cross-examined, perhaps the questions are too close to the truth. That broke the final layer of composure. Alito's voice rose for the first time, echoing across the chamber. This line of questioning is outrageous. The judiciary does not answer to populist politics or self-serving performances from members of Congress. Gasps filled the room. The tone, the volume, it was uncharacteristic, almost emotional. Crockett didn't flinch. You're right, Justice. The judiciary doesn't answer to politics, it answers to the Constitution. And that's exactly what I'm asking you to do. The tension snapped. Alito pushed his chair back, the sound of metal legs scraping against the marble floor cutting through the air like a blade. This is an ambush, he said, rising abruptly. I will not sit here and subject myself to political abuse disguised as oversight. A stunned silence followed. Cameras clicked in a frenzy. Members of the committee exchanged alarmed looks. Crockett remained seated, calm as ever. Walking away doesn't answer the question, Justice, she said softly. It only confirms it. That single sentence stopped him mid-step for just a heartbeat. But he didn't turn back. His jaw set and he walked straight toward the side exit, his robe brushing against the edge of the table. Every movement was captured, every flashbulb immortalizing the moment, a Supreme Court justice walking out on a congressional hearing. Reporters erupted into whispered chaos. Some gasped, others scribbled furiously. The committee chair tried to restore order, but the chamber had already become a storm. Crockett remained motionless, her pen resting across her notes. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The silence she left behind spoke louder than any argument. One congressman whispered across the table, "He actually left." Another replied, "He couldn't handle her precision." The gavel banged, but the room wouldn't calm. The cameras stayed locked on the empty seat where Justice Alito had been. His glass of water still half full, his microphone still live, his authority, suddenly, noticeably, diminished. Crockett finally stood. Her tone was calm, her words deliberate. "Let the record show," she said, "that a justice of the Supreme Court has refused to answer basic questions about judicial ethics. Not because they were unfair, but because they were too specific." The audience broke into murmurs. Every phrase was now a headline in waiting. She gathered her papers, looked toward the chair, and added, "Truth has a way of making power uncomfortable. That's not disrespect. That's democracy." The committee adjourned moments later, but the story was already viral. Every news outlet replayed the footage of Alito walking out. Every clip froze on Crockett's calm expression as he exited. By evening, the nation was debating not just the ethics of a justice, but the courage of a congresswoman. Crockett didn't celebrate. She simply returned to her office, placed her binder on the desk, and said quietly to her aide, "If truth makes them walk out, imagine what transparency will do." It was not anger that had won the day. It was precision. The news broke within minutes. Every major outlet carried the headline in blazing letters across their screens. Justice Samuel Alito walks out mid-hearing after clash with Rep. Jasmine Crockett. The clips flooded social media. The sound of Alito's chair scraping the marble floor replayed again and again. A single motion now symbolizing something far larger. The image of Crockett sitting calmly, eyes fixed on his retreating figure, became the defining picture of the day. Outside the Capitol, reporters swarmed. Commentators called it unprecedented, others called it necessary. Some spoke of disrespect to the court. Many saw courage in confrontation. But no one could deny what had happened. Power had been forced to look itself in the mirror. By the time Crockett stepped out of the chamber, flashes erupted like lightning. Questions flew at her from every direction. "Congresswoman, did you expect him to walk out? Do you think he'll face consequences? Was your tone too aggressive?" She stopped for a brief moment, calm as ever, and said, "I asked questions that deserved answers. If that's too aggressive, then maybe accountability is overdue." Her words spread faster than the footage. By nightfall, hashtags filled the digital skyline. Fight Crockett v. Alito for judicial accountability. Fef too precise answer. Across television panels, analysts dissected every exchange. They replayed the moment Alito snapped, the split-second pause before he walked out, and Crockett's unwavering stare. Legal scholars debated whether the confrontation would ignite reforms within the court. Political strategists debated what it meant for the balance of branches. But beneath all the noise, the public felt something different, a rare sense of clarity. For years, the judiciary had stood on a distant pedestal, untouchable and unchallenged. That pedestal now looked just a little lower, a little closer to human reach. In the quiet of her office, Crockett watched the replay once. Just once. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She simply leaned back in her chair and said softly to her aide, "He walked out because the questions were too exact, not too loud." Meanwhile, in chambers across the city, the impact settled like dust after an explosion. Judges whispered privately about the incident. Some defended Alito, saying the hearing had turned into spectacle. Others admitted, quietly, reluctantly, that Crockett's precision had struck a nerve long ignored. Even within the legal community, voices began to shift. A law professor on live television summed it up best: Jasmine Crockett didn't attack the court. She reminded it that ethics are not optional. They're the foundation of trust. In the following days, committees began drafting proposals for a Supreme Court code of ethics, not as a punishment, but as protection for the integrity the court claimed to uphold. The very questions that had made Alito walk out were now shaping legislative drafts. For many Americans, that was the true victory. Alito himself remained silent publicly. His office released a brief statement claiming he had departed the hearing due to procedural irregularities, but no one believed it. The footage spoke louder than any press release ever could. Talk shows dissected Crockett's composure. Editorials praised her poise. Political opponents criticized her methods, but couldn't deny her effectiveness. Even her critics admitted, she never lost her temper, never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Precision did all the work. One evening, during a late broadcast, a journalist summarized the nation's sentiment perfectly. She didn't make him walk out with anger. She made him walk out with truth. The weeks later, as the controversy continued to ripple, Congress reconvened for a follow-up hearing. This time, the seat reserved for Justice Alito remained empty. A symbolic silence. Crockett spoke briefly during that session. Her voice was firm, deliberate. "When people in power stop answering questions," she said, "that's when democracy must start asking louder ones." The chamber erupted in applause, rare, restrained, but undeniable. Outside, protesters and supporters alike held signs reading, "No one above ethics. Accountability is justice." Crockett asked what we all wanted to know. The debate she began had outgrown the room where it started. It had become a movement, not of outrage but of insistence. That night, under the glow of the Capitol dome, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. A justice had walked out, but the truth had stayed seated, and Jasmine Crockett, once underestimated, had proven that precision is more powerful than position. Power can walk away, truth cannot.